The preseason schedule is out for your Sacramento Kings. The regular season schedule coming very, very soon. Plus, we didn't talk about Davion Mitchell when I had Kyle Boone on last time on the Locked On Kings podcast before the draft. But now we're going to spend a lot of time talking about Mitchell, and Kyle's going to share his thoughts on Mitchell coming into the draft, his fit with the Sacramento Kings, and we'll talk a lot about the De'Aaron Fox, Davion Mitchell, and Tyrese Haliburton three-guard lineup. It's all on today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast.
It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off-season. If you're looking for in-depth analysis, game-by-game breakdowns, highlights, interviews with local and national experts, full coverage of your Sacramento Kings from January all the way through to December, this is the place for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I've been a Sacramento sports media member, Sacramento Kings media member for the last 7 years. This will be my 8th season covering the Kings, both as an on-air host and a multimedia journalist. From radio to television and in podcasting, I do it all, and it's all centered, of course, around your Sacramento Kings. And before we get to my conversation with CBS Sports draft analyst Kyle Boone, who has some amazing things to say about Davion Mitchell, and he is very honest about his confusion, just like my own confusion when the Kings drafted Mitchell on draft night. Kyle will also talk about his reservations that he has, or questioning the fit in some ways with Davion Mitchell and the Kings going forward, but nothing but praise for Mitchell, the basketball player, and thinks that the Kings drafted an absolute stud. So you're going to hear from him in just a little bit. Before that, though, let's go over the Sacramento Kings preseason schedule that was released. Now, I know preseason isn't the most exciting thing in the world, but it's one step closer to real Kings basketball coming back. And the best part of preseason is we're going to get to see Davion Mitchell, De'Aaron Fox, and Tyrese Haliburton play together for the first time. I'm very much looking forward to seeing if a three-guard lineup is incorporated during those preseason games, if Luke Walton and the Kings use that time to practice that a little bit or give it a trial run, see what works and what doesn't with those lineups. Also, we'll probably get a better idea of what Walton is thinking for his rotation. I think it's either going to be an 8 or 9-man rotation, more than likely 9, meaning 4 players off the bench alongside a starting 5. And I mean, Buddy Hield's still on this roster right now. Marvin Bagley's still on this roster. We don't know if both of those players are still going to be on the Kings come the start of preseason, but if they are, we'll get a really good indication of where Buddy stands, where Bagley stands, the three-guard lineup, like I talked about, who's going to be the backup center, if Mo Harkless is going to get playing time, if Terrence Davis is going to get opportunity off the bench, what kind of rotation Walton is going to have with his backcourt in particular. There are a lot of questions that hopefully will be answered, or we'll get some kind of inclination of what's going on from preseason. So here is the preseason schedule. The Kings will open up their preseason against the defending Western Conference champions, the Phoenix Suns. That game is inside the Golden One Center, 7 p.m. tip on Monday, October 4th. Then on Wednesday, October 6th, the Kings will go to the Staples Center in LA to take on the Clippers. That's a 7:30 tip. Then Monday, October 11th, they head up to Portland to take on the Portland Trail Blazers. Will the Blazers have Damian Lillard on their roster, or will they not? That's quieted down a lot, although I do believe there are still opportunities for Dame to be moved this offseason. If I had to put my money on it, I would say Dame would be back, and the Blazers are going to try one more desperate swing for the fences type move or two to really encourage him to stay, whether that's during the season, during the offseason, around the trade deadline. Who knows? My money's on Damian Lillard being on the Portland Trail Blazers for that preseason game. And then finally, the Kings will conclude their preseason against the Los Angeles Lakers back in Sacramento on Thursday, October 14th, a 7 p.m. tip on that one. Then it is expected that the Kings regular season will begin on either the 16th or the 17th of October, and we'll have to see when that regular season schedule is dropped. We're expecting it very, very soon, and of course, when that schedule is dropped, We will talk about it in detail here on Locked On Kings. I'm actually hoping to have a guest join me. Not sure who yet, but the two of us, we can dive through, look at this roster, or rather look at the schedule, and get a good idea for what stretches are extremely important for the Sacramento Kings. Well, I'm really interested in looking at the start of this schedule and seeing if the Kings can replicate their strong start that they got off to last season, but find a way to sustain it. And there always are going to be those brutal stretches, right? Where are those brutal stretches coming, and how are the Kings able to work their way through that, especially with how talented the Western Conference is? And of course, we'll always pay attention to national TV schedule, although I'll put my money on the Kings getting one national TV game this year. For some reason, it always seems to be in SAC, and I don't count the NBA TV games as national, even though I guess they kind of are. I don't count those. I'm talking like ESPN or TNT. It's been a millennium since the Kings have had an ESPN national TV game, or at least it feels like it. Usually TNT will have a national TV game for the Kings every once in a while. They didn't have one last season, but the last 2 seasons, if I'm not mistaken. So the Kings are due a national TV game, whether it's TNT, ESPN. I hope it's in Sacramento at some point. And Mark Jones should still call it because he's just that damn good. So we will see what happens when the schedule is released. Look forward to that, and make sure you tune into the Locked On Kings podcast when the schedule is released. We'll go over that and then some. But for right now, let's get over to my conversation with CBS Sports draft analyst Kyle Boone. Actually, before we do that, I want to let you know that today's episode of Locked On Kings is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline.ag. And now that the preseason schedule is out, pretty soon you're going to be able to bet on these games. Once the Kings regular season schedule is out, we'll be able to bet on those games as well. And we'll start to get those future numbers of the over-under win totals for the Sacramento Kings this year. I'm very interested to see where Vegas puts the Sacramento Kings in terms of win totals over-under. I'd say that they're going to set it at 38.5. And if that's the case, I'm taking the over, but I'm not taking it by much. But regardless of when it's set and what the number is, you can bet on it on betonline.ag. With the football season coming back, preseason happening right now, plus baseball season, the playoffs coming, you can bet on all of your professional sports action. There's MMA, UFC action as well, professional golf, soccer. They have it all. And if you head over to BetOnline right now, they have a new sign-up deal for you. It used to be 50%. Now they're doubling it, 100% welcome bonus on your first deposit, meaning is if you deposit $100, you get a free $100 to play with. And then when you have that money, make sure you listen to Locked On Bets, take their advice, and make even more money on BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. By the way, the promo code to cash in on that first time sign up 100% match offer is promo code Locked On, LOCKEDON, all one word. So make sure you're taking advantage of that. Well, now that he's led the Sacramento Kings to their second Summer League championship, we're feeling a lot better about the selection of Davion Mitchell at number 9 by Monte McNair and Sacramento. Although at the time that night, I remember the draft party inside the Golden One Center, some kind of odd murmurs and some confused clapping. I remember my reaction on our Locked On NBA Draft show being surprised and quite honestly a little bit disappointed by the selection. Now, based off what we've seen out of Davion Mitchell, there's nothing but happiness when it comes to what he is providing the Sacramento Kings. Before the draft, though, I spent a lot of time with my guest today, Kyle Boone. I love having him on every single year before the draft. Now, I wish I wasn't talking so much about the Kings being in the lottery every year, but one of the best parts about the draft process is having Kyle Boone from CBS Sports. He's one of their excellent draft analysts over there. Having him join me. And when Kyle and I were together last time before the draft happened, Kyle, how many wings were we talking about, right? We're talking about Moses Moody, talking about Franz Wagner, talking about James Bouknight, and the Kings go with a guard in the draft. Just goes to show who knows what we're talking about.
I know. Yeah, that's exactly right. I think we had kind of locked in on, okay, it looks like they're probably gonna select Franz Wagner, who ends up going a pick before Davion Mitchell. If he was still on the board, I think it would have been a pretty interesting decision. But from what we've seen from Davion Mitchell, at least in Summer League, I think if you're a Kings fan, you got to be pretty excited for the future of this franchise. Davion Mitchell looks like a really good draft pick so far.
because we didn't talk about him. I didn't talk about Mitchell at all during the pre-draft process because it's kind of the same way I didn't talk about Tyrese Haliburton at all in last year's draft because I figured Tyrese wasn't going to be there. I knew Davion, there was a chance that he could be there, but I didn't think the Kings were going to go the guard route, having De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Haliburton as their future backcourt. So I never got to ask you about your thoughts on Davion Mitchell heading into the draft and have they changed it all based off of what we've seen in Summer League?
They haven't changed at all. Davion Mitchell was a guy who I had number 6 on the CBS Sports Top 100 Big Board. So just from strictly a value standpoint, I mean, getting him at number 9 in this draft is fantastic. This is one of the best 6 players in my view in this draft class. And so I think Davion, the knock with him was, okay, he hasn't really been a good 3-point shooter outside of his last season at Baylor. So you think, okay, was it just kind of an aberrational shooting year where he was amazing in an offense that was really, really good, the best in college basketball? And then 2, he's a little bit older, right? He's been at the college level for several years. You wonder about, okay, if you're taking an older guy, how much more can he improve? There was even some scuttlebutt that I heard that, okay, if you're going to take Davion Mitchell, he's maybe a little bit on the smaller end for a point guard. The shot creation is obviously there. He's an explosive athlete. Defensively, he's amazing. But is he just like a backup point guard? And so because of that, I think the value on him, or at least the view of him, dropped a little bit, where I ended up, I think, settling him at number 7 on the big board. I think there was a chance that he could go as high as number 6, but also I wouldn't have been surprised had he dropped to like number 14 in this draft. And so all that being said, I think what we've seen from Davion Mitchell so far has been nothing short of spectacular. And the defense is obviously going to translate. That was the one thing that I was definitely confident was going to translate. And some of the defensive flashes we've seen from him, it's like, wow, like I knew he'd be good, but he looks like really, really special. So I'm really excited from what I've seen from him so far.
I know it's hard to recreate raw reactions to something that's happened weeks ago, but I mean, there's video of me reacting to this pick, honestly, with a negative outlook. Now, I also admitted too that no matter who the Kings selected, even if they had selected Franz Wagner, who I really thought was going to be the selection there, after the Buddy Hield trade with the Lakers fell through, everything was going to feel underwhelming, right? So I think part of my reaction to Davion Mitchell kind of fell into just that underwhelming because of what had happened with the trade earlier on in the night. But do you remember your reaction to the Kings selecting Davion Mitchell, knowing what we knew going in, that Fox and Haliburton were the future there?
Yeah, it's the same that I have now. I'm super excited and intrigued about the fit because De'Aaron Fox is playing point guard. Tyrese Haliburton is a guy can create offense. And then Davion Mitchell, that is his calling card. Like he was a really good creator off the ball. And so I get you could probably play 3-guard lineups, and I think each of them complements each other in different ways. So I think the fit can work. At the same time, I'm like, it would have probably been good to get a wing. Just strictly from a fit perspective, I think it would have made more sense. So I'm kind of torn on it. I think it is kind of what I'm getting at. I'm excited, and I think it's going to be really interesting to watch. I'm also not entirely sure how it's going to work. And so, like, I guess I'm basically waiting to reserve judgment because I think it could end up being a situation like where all 3 guys, because they're selfless players, because they're really good creators, like this could actually be a pretty interesting and fun team to watch. I just, on paper right now, I'm not exactly sold on this being like a great fit, at least in the short term for the Kings.
You know what you said there, waiting to reserve judgment. We could basically sum up almost every single move that general manager Monty McNair has made by those words, whether it's the moves that he made at the trade deadline last year. Now we have a little bit of a better idea of why he made the moves that he made. And we thought initially taking on money like DeLon Wright's deal was going to hurt the Kings in their chance to resign Richaun Holmes, which they did. They were able to bring Richaun Holmes back. So now it's like, okay, we have some closure on that. Now we're able to give that a grade. I feel like this draft pick falls right into that mix, right? Because you mentioned the 3-guard lineup, which we are going to talk about. If that guard lineup can come together and work together, then you possibly are getting back-to-back home runs in the draft with the Tyrese Haliburton pick, who's a unanimous home run, or at least so far has been a unanimous home run going back the year before. But Kyle, I wanted to talk to you about Davion Mitchell filling needs, because the Kings have tried to draft for need in the past, and it's gotten them in trouble. They've taken need over best talent available, and it's come back to bite them in the butt a number of times. But the more I started thinking about it, even though Davion doesn't necessarily fit a positional need for the Kings, he fills a massive defensive need, as they were horrifically bad on defense last year. But also, this team has lacked like a dog mentality, that leadership, that physical presence that I've seen out of Davion so far in Summer League. Now, it's going to be very different when you're a rookie playing with guys who are making $30+ million, $20+ million on the main roster. But one of the knocks against Davion and most players in his situation coming into the draft is when you're a little bit older, that's a knock against you now, because maybe you won't have as long of a career, and a team couldn't potentially have you for as long. But in that case, him being 22 years old, or this case, I think it works really, really well for him, for Sacramento, and for the day one impact I think he can make on this roster.
Oh, for sure. No question. I think the huge thing for Davion Mitchell is he was clearly, I think, the most NBA-ready prospect in this class. Now, I'm super high on Cade Cunningham. I think Evan Mobley's going to be a star. Yada, yada, yada. All the caveats. Davion Mitchell, because of what he did in college, at Baylor, just being able to run the offense, being able to shoot threes at a high level, being able to defend, I was pretty confident that he's going to be a guy who's going to come in and step in and compete for a spot right away and compete at a high level. He was a guy, for that reason, that was linked several times to the Warriors, because the Warriors, who had 7-14, everyone thought, okay, well, last year they took a swing on James Wiseman. Not that he's a bust, but it didn't totally work out, right? And everyone had really high expectations, and he looked like a rookie. Davion Mitchell, thus far, does not look like a rookie. Not even close to it. He looks like a star. And I will say, I try my best to reserve any type of sweeping judgments based off of Summer League, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've seen guys every single year that look like superstars who end up being just another guy in the NBA. The thing with Davion that I think is so different and puts him in a different category is his defense. And we can talk about his defense all day, but I think it's important to, again, state just how easily that is going to translate at the NBA level. When you're seeing him, like the clip that went viral where he's defending James Bouknight, and Bouknight has a bag. He is a guy who's going to create at a really high level in the NBA, like a guy that I think is easily going to be a 20-point per game type of scorer in the NBA. And the way that he's able to create his own shot and create separation on pretty much any defender was why we had him in our top 10. How Davion was able to just completely get up underneath him and disrupt him. Like, James Bouknight is a top 10 player in this draft, I think. And he looked completely overwhelmed against Davion. That skill set, to me, is going to translate to the NBA. And so for that reason, like, I'm super high on Davion. I think, like, even if the three-point shooting last season we saw at Baylor doesn't continue, I still think it will. But even if it's not as good and it's somewhat closer to in between what we saw early in his college career, I think the value that he's going to bring on defense, and then just as like his mentality overall, like, he's a guy who wants to guard the best player on offense. He's a guy who wants to get after it and kind of set the tone on defense. That mentality, I think, going back to your point, is kind of what the Kings need. So yeah, they didn't totally feel like a position of need, but mentality-wise, I think he gives the Kings something that they really, really needed. And when you go Tyrese Haliburton and Davion Mitchell in back-to-back drafts, like, Tyrese, like, by all accounts, is just like first team all high character and selfless. Like, the way he plays, like, he could literally play on every single NBA team. When you add that to De'Aaron Fox and to Davion Mitchell, like, that is a threesome that, okay, they don't fit on paper, but those are three players that I think you would just take in a vacuum and say, okay, let's build around these guys and see what happens.
The Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by our friends over at RockAuto.com. And with the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models of vehicles, it's now impossible for your local auto parts store to carry all the parts that you need. Why just endure pointless or even intimidating questioning when you're trying to order these parts, only to run into the issues of a warehouse can only carry so many parts. Brands are specific to companies that sell them. You don't have that problem at rockauto.com. You go to rockauto.com, you have access to all the brands, a variety of price points. Everything you need is on Rock Auto. You can save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30, 50, or even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? Seriously, you will save that much money on rockauto.com. And also, Rock Auto is a family business. It's important to support our family and local businesses right now during this hard time. But yes, Rock Auto, a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Make sure you go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Make sure you save yourself some money by doing so. Write Locked On in there, how did you hear about us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. And of course, the Locked On Kings podcast brought to you by our friends over at Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on the planet. And did you know Built Bar has a ton of delicious flavors? And you know why they have so many flavors? Because they know you like variety. However, we know that everybody has a favorite. Whether you like it or not, you do have a favorite. Like mine is mint brownie. And you can discover your favorite by trying a bunch of their different flavors like double chocolate, salted caramel, strawberry, orange, cookies and cream by ordering a mixed box on built.com. Try all their different bars. Pick which ones are your favorite. You'll love them. They're covered in 100% chocolate. And on top of being basically candy bars, they're good for you. 17 to 18 grams of protein, calories ranging from 130 to 180, only 4 to 5 grams of sugar, and only 4 to 5 grams of net carbs. They're amazing flavors, all tasty, and all healthy. So make sure you go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your order. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. On draft night, Monty McNair was asked, how are you going to make these three work? How are they going to play? And I think Davion Mitchell has proven to us in Summer League, even if it's just Summer League, you have to find time for this man to play. He can't just be a 20 to 25 minute per night guy off the bench at his absolute peak. You have to find a way to play him, just like you have to find a way to play both De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Haliburton. So that leads us into this three-guard lineup conversation, right, Kyle? And I'm not going to ask you to tell me why it won't work or why it will work or really break it down, because it's different. The NBA is always changing, right? But I did have one of Davion's assistants from Baylor on with me talking a little bit about this three-guard lineup. And he said a three-guard lineup is a set that they did a lot in their championship run last year with Baylor. So Davion's at least familiar with it. Now that's at the NCAA level. Stepping up to the NBA where guys are bigger and faster despite their size, that could be a little bit different. So I just wanted to ask you, in your mind, looking at how much you know about Davion, how much you know about Tyrese Haliburton from the last two drafts, and then how much you know about De'Aaron Fox. What do you think about that three-guard lineup will work, and what do you have concerns won't work at the NBA level?
So I can see this being like more of like a 2.5 guard lineup where, and stick with me here, I actually think Tyrese could play like on the wing. Like he's got pretty good size. His defensive instincts are really, really good, but he's like a connector. He doesn't necessarily have to be the guy who has the ball in his hands. He doesn't necessarily have to be the guy who is creating. And it reminds me, going even back to like when I was evaluating him as a draft prospect, he was compared to Lonzo Ball all the time. And it was in part because, okay, he's got great size. He's got really good length. He's a really good creator. But there was some questions, okay, can he be like your primary shot creator? I think the answer to that question, at least with Lonzo, is like probably not. Like you would probably rather him play next to a true point guard or a more ball dominant creator. I think that's probably the same with Tyrese Haliburton. And so when you pair like a connector like Tyrese Haliburton with De'Aaron Fox and with Davion Mitchell, the fit makes a ton of sense. Like Tyrese is so versatile that he is just going to be able to kind of make things cohesive in a way on this Kings roster that I think ultimately is going to be really, really beneficial on offense and on defense. They're going to have a ton of versatility and a lot of flexibility with how they use these lineups. Tyrese is a guy we already know is a very good passer. He's a very high IQ player, but you don't necessarily have to have him as one of the lead guards. So I can see it being like he's kind of the guy who's creating and connecting, whereas Davion and De'Aaron are more like your true primary guys who are really catalyzing and creating most of, I think, on offense.
Two-part question here about Davion's defense and the effort that he plays with. The first part is, do you feel that that is the way that he plays, how aggressive he plays defensively? Do you think that's sustainable over an 82 game regular season, let alone the playoffs, which the Kings want to get there, but we're not going to include that yet. We're just focusing on an 82 game regular season for now. Do you think Davion can sustain that kind of effort? And then there was a moment in the Summer League Championship game where Davion was guarding Peyton Pritchard, and he battles through a screen, doesn't bite on any fakes, stays in front of Pritchard, bumps him a couple times, and the entire Kings bench stands up and reacts as if he had just dunked on the other end of the floor. It's a reaction that you typically only see for offensive plays, but they reacted to Davion for that defensive effort. So the part two of the question is, do you think that the way Davion plays will inspire his teammates, even established teammates like a De'Aaron Fox, to try and match that level defensively? Because I think that's what the Kings are looking for or hoping for too.
Yeah. The thing with Davion to me is I think we can kind of pontificate on like, okay, we saw it at Summer League, we saw it in college. Can it work for 82 games? Like I could say, he might wear down, or it might not be totally sustainable for 82 games. But if you pose that question to Davion, he would probably laugh in your face, because if you ask his coaches in college, and this is more what Matt Norlander and Gary Parrish have told me, like he's just like a relentless worker, like a guy who like you literally have to kick out of the gym because he is always working. And so like he doesn't care about that question. Like he's going to try to give you as much as he can for 82 games. And so like just even having that mentality of like, I don't care. Like if you're concerned about, I don't care. Like I'm going to give you everything I have every single night. And okay, if it wanes and my effectiveness as a defender wanes over 82 games, that's fine. I'm still going to give you everything I got. So that mentality, to me, like there are definitely players on this Kings roster that like have that mentality, but the outward toughness that Davion plays with is something that I don't think is totally on this Kings roster. And so that mentality, like that attitude, that swagger that he plays with, I think is super infectious. Like when you're getting cheers for playing defense, that's just different. You don't see that at the NBA level. So his teammates are going to love playing with him. Like that is another thing that I think is really important. And I think something that clearly the Kings front office identified was like, like the fit may not be like perfect on paper, but like this guy can play and people are going to love playing with him. So all that being said, like I think it's going to end up being like one of the more interesting draft picks this year, because I think he's going to play like meaningful minutes, and this team is going to be really, really interesting to watch.
I wanted to get your opinion really quick on the 39th pick for the Kings, Neemias Queta, out of Utah State. The natural 7-footer, Monty McNair said in his post-game, or rather post-draft press conference, that he was surprised that Queta fell that far, that Queta is an analytics type pick with his double-double average, his efficient scoring, but also his 3+ block shots per game and nearly 2 steals per game. What do you think about Queta? He's on a 2-way contract with the Kings, so very unlikely that he gets much time with the main roster this year. We'll probably get a lot of rep with the Stockton Kings, but the possibility of him turning into that big man physical rim protector presence that the Kings have lacked for a long time.
He's really, really interesting. I watched him at the 2019 NBA Draft Combine, and I'll be honest, he was really bad. He was really bad. Like the size was really interesting, and I think there was a lot of people who were really optimistic about his pro potential, but he kind of got ate up. He's not super mobile. He just looked a little bit out of place. but he's special. Like, he's a guy at the college level who completely dominated at Utah State. His length is disruptive. He's 7 foot. He uses his length really, really well. Can block shots, and then obviously on offense, like, he's just very, very efficient. The analytics darling, I think, is how you put it. And I think that's accurate. Like, all the analytics guys that I know are like, this guy's a top 25 player in this draft. Like, why is he not going in the first round? So I didn't have him that high. I think there's some limitations with his game, but from what we've seen at the summer league, like, it's possible the analytics guys were right. Like, this is a really good player, and getting him on a 2-way contract, just to even see like how he develops over the next few years, I think is really, really interesting.
Last thing I have for you, Kyle, has nothing to do with the Sacramento Kings. This draft got wild really, really quickly. I mean, you have the top three of Cunningham, Green, and Mobley, right? Scotty Barnes goes 4. It's like, okay, surprising, but the Raptors took him. Kind of makes sense. Jalen Suggs goes 5. All right, when's Kuminga going to go? Then Giddey goes to the Thunder at 6. You have, like we mentioned, Wagner going 8, which isn't super surprising. You have Zaire Williams going 10 to the Pelicans. Then you have Joshua Primo going to the San Antonio Spurs at 12. In your mind, just walk me through your reactions after spending months upon months upon months building these mock drafts and trying to plan for this draft lottery. We knew it was going to get a little crazy and a little weird, and the draft was going to start really at pick number 4. But what threw you for the biggest loop on draft night?
Giddey at number 6, I think, was second most surprising. Like, it was definitely up there, because there was some talk that, okay, the Grizzlies had moved up to number 10, and that was who they were targeting, was Josh Giddey. They wanted to get in that range. So seeing him go number 6, even with like Jonathan Kuminga on the board, like, I was like, whoa. And James Bouknight was there. There was some talk that they were interested in James Bouknight. So Bouknight ends up going number 11 to the Hornets. Giddey to me was like the first, whoa, that's a big surprise. Zaire Williams at number 10 was like, pick my jaw off the floor, because I thought, wow, I did not think he would go that high. And I was surprised. Zaire was interesting because I did a mock draft where I projected like who has the highest long-term ceiling. Zaire was a top 10 player on that mock draft. It was just what he did at Stanford was like not impressive. He was really bad. And there was some circumstances there where it's like, okay, the team was basically living out of a hotel. He had some personal issues that he was working with during the season. So clearly, like, the Grizzlies are just taking a huge swing. I was really impressed by that. Primo, to me, I think, was probably the most interesting one, because this is a guy who ended up staying in the draft, but like, he was 50-50 on either going back to Alabama or staying in the draft. And most of those guys go in the late first round, but he ends up going number 12 to the Spurs. The fact that he goes to the Spurs, it's like, oh wait, did we miss something? Like,
Yep.
Because the Spurs, they get the benefit of the doubt, where it's like, okay, these guys, they clearly like snuck him under the table. And so he's been really interesting in summer league. Like, I'm really interested to see how that works. But yeah, there's always some surprises on draft nights. Why I think we both love the draft, and it's impossible to predict. So in the predicting business, it makes you look silly sometimes. But yeah, it was super fun on draft night.
And then you have Kuminga and Moody both going to the Golden State Warriors, which I thought was a very solid draft for them. You have both of the Johnsons, Jalen and Keon, going back-to-back 20 and 21. It's just, I mean, you might as well treat this draft like you're guessing completely on a March Madness bracket, and whoever hit it was like 1 out of 10 million. But congratulations to you if you got this lottery right. But Kyle, you do such fantastic work covering the draft. I know you're already putting the work in for the 2022 NBA draft. I can't wait to have you back on to talk to you about that. Although I hope we're talking about potential steals outside of the lottery for the Kings to take for once. Hopefully the Kings make the playoffs this year, end that drought, and don't have to worry about the lottery so much. But regardless of where we're at, we will have you back on to talk about it for sure. Thank you so much for everything, my friend. I can't wait to have you back on.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for having me, man.
Huge thank you to Kyle for coming back on the Locked On Kings podcast and joining me once again. I look forward to having him back on. You always seem to enjoy when I have him on. His insight is fantastic. They do great work surrounding the draft and college basketball over at CBS Sports. So make sure you check out all of their great stuff. And Kyle, he gets his work done early, man. He's already started putting in work looking at the 2022 draft class. He'll have mock drafts and in-depth pieces and more coming out very, very shortly. So make sure you stay tuned to that. And I can't wait to have him back on Locked On Kings, hopefully in the near future. And I look forward to having you back with me on Locked On Kings when we will go over the regular season schedule that is going to be released. And to pull back the curtain a little bit, a little personal news. Many of you know that I'm expecting my first child. My son was expected to be born. His due date was August 31st. But after a doctor's appointment this week, my wife and I learned that our doctor wants to induce my wife next week. So that's going to have an effect on our schedule. I'm hoping to get 1 or 2 more Locked On Kings episodes out for you before that happens. But during the time that I am out, and I'll probably take a week to a week and a half off or something like that from doing Locked On Kings, or maybe I'll just do Locked On Kings with my son in my hands and maybe he can provide his input. But I'm thinking about replaying or re-airing my audio documentary that I put together about the 2001-2002 Sacramento Kings season, that infamous season, of course, the 2002 playoffs ending in the controversial loss to the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals. I did a 3-part audio documentary about that entire season, from the beginning of the season, the offseason, re-signing Chris Webber, all the way through that controversial game, featuring names like Bobby Jackson and Doug Christie, who are a part of the production. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard it, but if you haven't, I'm considering re-uploading it. I actually think that's the route I'm going to go. If you want me to do that, or if you're opposed to doing that, let me know for any reason. You can reach me at Matt George Sac on Twitter, all one word, and that's SAC. You can also email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or feel free to leave your thoughts, your opinions in the comment section down below. Also, talk to me about what you thought about what Kyle Boone said about Davion Mitchell. Talk to me about the preseason schedule, what you're expecting or hoping for the regular season schedule. Send that all to me. I'd love to engage in conversation with you. So a lot of things going on right now. New job, new baby, but same old Locked On Kings podcast. I can't wait to have you back with me for the next one. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.